The Lenape, also called the Lenni Lenape and the Delaware, are an indigenous people of the northeastern woodlands who live in Canada and the United States. They are also called Delaware Indians, and their historical territory include present-day New Jersey and eastern Pennsylvania along the Delaware River watershed, New York City, western Long Island, and the lower Hudson Valley. Lenape kinship system has matrilineal clans. That is, children belong to their mother's clan from which they gain social status and identity. The mother's eldest brother was more significant as a mentor to the male children than was their father, who was generally of another clan. Hereditary leadership passed through the maternal line, and the women elders could remove leaders of whom they disapproved. That's very, very interesting. Agricultural land was managed by women and allotted according to the subsistence needs of their extended families. Families were matrilocal. Newlywed couples would live with the bride's family, where her mother and sisters could also assist her with her growing family. During the Beaver Wars in the first half of the 17th century, European colonists were careful to keep firearms from the coastally located Delaware, while rival Iroquoian peoples such as the Susquehannocks and Confederation of the Iroquois became comparatively well armed. Subsequently, the Lenape became subjugated and made tributary to first the Susquehannocks, then the Iroquois, even needing their rivals' agreement to initiate treaties such as land sales. Like most tribes, Lenape communities were weakened by newly introduced diseases originating in Europe, mainly smallpox, but also cholera, influenza, and dysentery, and recurrent violent racial conflict with Europeans. Iroquois peoples occasionally fought the Lenape. As the 18th century progressed, many surviving Lenape moved west into the relatively empty upper Ohio River basin. Who were the Molly Maguires? In the latter half of the 19th century, Schuylkill County, Pennsylvania was an area rife with violence. Between 1861 and 1875, a series of violent assaults, arsons, and murders was blamed on a secret society of Irish immigrants known as the Molly Maguires. The group had originally emerged in north central Ireland in the 1840s as an offshoot of a long line of rural secret societies, including the White Boys and Ribbonmen, who responded to miserable working conditions and evictions by tenant landlords with bloody vengeance. Faced with the prospect of starvation during the Great Potato Famine, more than 1 million Irish immigrated to America, where a large concentration settled in the anthracite coal region of Pennsylvania in search of work. Irish Catholics were routinely met with discrimination based on both their religion and heritage, and often encountered help wanted signs with disclaimers that read, "Irish need not apply." Accepting the most physically demanding and dangerous mining jobs, the men and their families were forced to live in overcrowded, company-owned housing, buy goods from company-owned shops, and visit company-owned doctors. In many cases, workers wound up owing their employers at the end of each month. When the Civil War broke out and miners were drafted to join what they perceived to be a rich man's war. They began to rebel. Coffin notices threatening death, allegedly penned by Molly Maguires, were delivered to mining supervisors and scabs who planned to fill their roles during strikes. And as working conditions worsened in the 1870s, the violence escalated. In all, 24 mine foremen and supervisors were assassinated. In 1873, Franklin B. Gowan, president of the Reading Railroad, hired the Pinkerton Detective Agency to infiltrate and destroy the Molly Maguires, whose union organizing became an impediment to increasing railroad profits. Using the alias James McKenna, native Irishman James McParland spent 2.5 years living alongside coal miners, eventually gaining their trust. Despite the conflict of interest, Gowan served as the chief prosecutor during the subsequent trials. Based almost entirely on McParland's testimony, 20 men were sentenced to death, 10 of whom were executed on June 21, 1877, also known as Black Thursday. Although the existence of the Molly Maguires as an organized band of outlaws in America is still debated, most historians now agree that the trials and executions were an outrageous perversion of the criminal justice system. In 1979, more than 100 years following his hanging, John Kehoe, the supposed king of the Molly Maguires, was granted a full pardon by the state of Pennsylvania. Now, this is a little something I wanted to share with you guys. The execution of Molly Maguires. County, Carbon. Marker location, Old Carbon County Jail, Broadway, Jimthorpe. September 9th was the dedication date, 2006. On a wall of the old county jail in what was then Mauchchunk, today Jimthorpe, is a handprint that, according to folklore, was made by Alex Campbell, one of 4 members of an Irish labor organization called the Molly Maguires, executed on June 21, 1877, insisting that he was innocent. Campbell declared, "This is proof of my words. That mark will never be wiped out," and it never has. No matter how many times it was cleaned and painted, the handprint to this day is still visible. I would like to, maybe sometime next week, get down to the actual Old Carbon County Jail, and I would be able to show you folks what it actually does look like. All my kids went to the Old Carbon County Prison on field trips when they were younger, and it's an interesting little bit of, folklore. Were the Mollies terrorists, working class heroes, or something in between? To this day, the guilt of the 20 Mollies executed between 1877 and 1879 is hard to discover. Nearly all the evidence that led to their convictions was provided by James McParland, a Pinkerton detective who infiltrated their ranks. What is not in doubt, however, is the dangerous precedent in the history of Pennsylvania law enforcement that the convictions and execution of these Irish coal miners initiated. Molly Maguire was supposedly the leader of riots in Ireland against exploitative English landowners during the 1840s. In the 1850s, Irish coal miners brought the organization with them when they crossed the ocean to work in the anthracite coal fields of northeast Pennsylvania. Conditions were terrible in the Pennsylvania mines. Safety regulations were non-existent or neglected. Breaker boys as young as 6 worked picking slate. Families lived in poor company-owned houses and were forced to shop at company-owned stores. Nothing except a few dollars compensated those injured or the families of those killed in this dangerous trade. and foremen frequently abused workers or undervalued the quality of coal mined, which determined their wages. During the Civil War, Irish immigrant miners killed a number of mine supervisors and executives on local draft boards who attempted to induct them into the Union Army. After the war, the violence and lawlessness continued. Northeastern Pennsylvania was in many ways like the Wild Wild West, an isolated region with towns that had few, if any, police and constant conflict between coal operators and their workers. Disputes were settled by the men who took action. We may never know whether the Mollys carried out any murders and what, if any, connections existed among the Mollys, the murderers, the local Democratic Party, the Order of Ancient Hibernians, and the Union formed in the coal regions in 1868. What we do know is that Frank Gowen, the ruthless president of the Philadelphia and Reading Railroad, was secretly buying enough mines to gain control of the industry, and had starved miners into submission during the disastrous long strike of 1875 to break the back of the Working Men's Benevolent Association. The Mollys, in league with the local Democrats, had their own political machine, which controlled a number of governments in Schuylkill County. In the early 1870s, Gowen hired the Pinkerton Detective Agency to infiltrate the Molly Maguires and eliminate the last opposition to his control of anthracite mines. And again, it talks about 2.5 years being in with them. After McFarland's cover was blown, Gowen himself, serving as the district attorney of Schuylkill County, led the prosecution of the Molly Maguires, who were indicted and then convicted, largely on McFarland's testimony, I might add. On June 21st, 1877, the last of the Molly Maguires was hanged in Carbon County Prison in Mauchchunk. The execution of the Molly Maguires helped cement Gowen's control of the anthracite coal industry and crushed Union activity in the coal regions for close to a decade. It also won the Pinkerton Agency national celebrity. Alan Pinkerton wrote Molly Maguires and the Detectives, a romanticized history of the story, which he published in 1879. The executions did not, however, intimidate workers elsewhere in the state. Less than a month after the Molly Maguires execution, the Great Rail Strike of 1877 erupted in Pittsburgh and then spread to rail yards across the state. Despite all the confusion about the history of Molly Maguires, what is not an issue is what the trial of 1877 reveals about the domination of Pennsylvania business interests over the state's political and legal system. Doesn't really sound like much has changed since 1877, really, if you think about it. What took place was one of the most astounding surrenders of sovereignty in American history. A private corporation initiated the investigation through a private detective agency. A private police force arrested the alleged offenders. The coal company attorneys prosecuted them. The state only provided the courtroom and hangman. In the decades that followed, railroads, coal companies, and steel companies continued to use Pinkerton agents deputized under coal and iron police commissions to enforce their will upon workers and their families. Henry Frick, chairman of the Carnegie Steel Company, used them in 1884 to guard his coal fields and strikebreakers. In 1891, to protect Italian strikebreakers, and again with disastrous results during the Homestead Strike of 1892. Only then did the state of Pennsylvania become alarmed that private armies, rather than public servants, were wielding police powers in William Penn's Commonwealth, including the powers to enter private homes, disperse, hang on, okay, I lost my place here for a moment. Disperse crowds and arrest and imprison citizens. Very interesting about the Molly Maguires. There was a movie made about the Molly Maguires, very popular movie. You might even be able to actually find it here on YouTube. Um, all I could say is when you really think about Pennsylvania's like early beginnings with the Indians and coal, the railways, and the Molly Maguires. I mean, really, what has changed? Think about it for a moment. Corporations pay their workers sometimes barely a livable wage, even now. Uh, no benefits or little to no benefits. God forbid, sick days, paid leave, like, yeah, okay. A point system. Um, I mean, so many ridiculous things now that people deal with for their employment. Um, if you really do like a comparison, it may be a different era, but like big businesses and corporations really, wielding things over their employees, um, it really has not changed all that much. If you really think about it, um, it's just a different era. And instead of using detective agencies, they use social media. I mean, really, we think we have come so far, but yet in some ways you have to wonder, have we really? Definitely a topic to ponder, food for thought. Well, guys, I really do hope you like this video. If you do, please give it a big thumbs up, and if you haven't already, hit my subscribe button. Don't forget to hit that bell so you are notified every time I do upload a new video. Hit all. Take care, everyone, and I will see you all on my next one. Have a great evening. Bye.